Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Simply Build an Interface File. I'm Alora from SpinifexIT Marketing. In a moment, I'll be joined by our Regional Solution Architect, Brendan Andrews Warmuth. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. To start with, on your left is the GoToWebinar viewer in which you will see the presentation, and on to your right is the control panel of the GoToWebinar, which you can use to ask questions and select audio mode. You're listening in using your computer's speaker system by default. However, if you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Time permitting, we will answer all your questions. However, in the case that we run out of time, we will reply via email. And lastly, if you know someone who should have attended the webinar or if you are looking for the recording yourself, an on-demand version of the webinar will be available approximately 48 hours after the webcast and can be accessed at www.spinifexit.com/video. Today's presentation is being recorded and the link will be provided to attendees within 48 hours. All right, so that pretty much sums up our housekeeping. I will now hand you over to Brendan, who will give you a full presentation of our topic today.
Thanks very much, Laura. I'm going to just quickly change the slide here. So today on the agenda to talk about interface files, I have a few different items I'm going to go through. So the first thing I thought is a bit of a review before we kick in. We'll just talk a little bit about the standard output options and how those work, and then why you might need to use an interface file instead of those options. So what are the business cases for using the interface files? What's the functionality that's there? And then I'm going to jump in and actually show you how to configure an interface file and do a couple examples there to show you how that functionality works. And then we've got some newer functionality available as well, which we call the Delta interface. And what that is going to allow you to do is just output changes, different changes to different data. And so I'll give you an overview of that functionality as well. So just to go back and kind of remind everybody why you might want to use Easy Reporter to deliver your interfaces. So oftentimes customers are delivering interfaces using ABAP code and writing custom reports. So a lot simpler to use a tool like Easy Reporter, where you can see, as you know, if you've been using Easy Reporter before, is there's plenty of access to all sorts of different data available. So oftentimes you need to interface payroll data as well as master data, something off to your vendors, for example. You need to interface tax information as well as master data or org data as well. And Easy Reporter really makes it easy to incorporate all of those different pieces of data. And any report, as you can probably imagine, any report that can be built in Easy Reporter can be used to create an interface file. So the more specific use cases, I guess, with Easy Reporter, obviously you don't need to write any custom code. You can build an interface using the user-friendly front-end Easy Reporter screens. There is an opportunity to provide some customizing using user exits if you need to. It's not very common, but it's available. And obviously all of the data that you're using in Easy Reporter is real-time. So like all of those different data sources we looked at, all of the information is real-time, which is very important, obviously, when you're interfacing to critical systems like identity management, health and safety, those types of things. And you can automatically schedule those interface files. So once you've built that report to create that file, you can automatically create a schedule and say, well, I need this file to update a different system every day, or I need to send information to my vendors once a month, or whatever the case may be. Set that all up as a schedule, and then you don't have to worry about it going forward. It just takes care of it for you. So as a reminder, the standard Easy Reporter file output And there's a number of different file types that I'll talk about just briefly in a minute. But for all of those standard file outputs, you'll expect the file that is output to match the output that you see on the SAP screen. So for example, on the right-hand side there, you'll see there's a report that I've run, and it's giving me some basic output, and there's the file that it's created, essentially exactly the same. Same headers, same order of fields, all of that kind of stuff. So that's your limitation of your standard file outputs. A lot of the time that's good enough, but then there's going to be some cases where you need to be able to control that a bit more and do some more functionality. So just remember that all those standard formats are going to come out in that format. There are, like I said, a lot of different options available to you. So just a bit of a recap there. You'll see we've got CSV with or without a header, SSV, same thing with or without a header, a number of different text options. So sometimes these are enough to be able to send to your vendors or send to your other systems, but you may need something a bit more complex. That's where the interface files come in. So you've also got down the bottom there the formatted Excel, which is a popular one. There's a few more features in that. The PDF, which is a nice one if you want to lock down the data that's sent to, and so people can't play around with it. And the newest one that's just been added, if you haven't seen this yet, this came out in the most recent release. I definitely recommend checking out the video for the Q4 release information, because the XLSX format has been added, and that allows you to maintain your subtotals in your file. Previously you had to output a file in the foreground to be able to get those subtotals. Now you can use those subtotals in any of your emailed files or files down to the server, running background and things like that. It also allows you to set up your own formatting templates, so you can kind of change the color of the subtotal lines and things like that. So I definitely recommend checking that out. That's a cool new format. But let's get on then to the interface. So that's the background. So when might you want to use the interface files? So the biggest advantages, as I've kind of alluded to as we're going through here, would be that you have the ability to control the layout of your file. So where a standard file format outputs the same column order, the same hidden or shown columns, the same column headings as your report itself, the interface file allows you to control those things separately. It allows you to set up a header that may be a different layout from the footer, as well as having different content. The other great thing you can do with the interface file option is you can actually include multiple reports. So a common example is, say you've got a vendor that you're sending information to. The first part of the file that they want to receive might have all of the employees who have recently joined and have started paying into that vendor. And that's their kind of initial membership information, for example. Then the second part of the file will have every single employee that paid money to that vendor in that particular pay period. And that might be a much larger section and have more details around how we calculated how much they paid and why they paid it and so on and so forth. And then there might be a final section, and that says, here's all the employees who have left and stopped paying. And the reason they've stopped paying, they've left the organisation, so on and so on. So it gives you the ability to create those more complex files. So some of the other features as well that you'll see that are available, and I'll show you these when I get to the demo, is you can also set particular fields in your report to be mandatory. So if you know the data that you're sending across to another system, there's a mandatory field. If they try to import that data and that field is missing, it's going to bomb the whole process. You can set that field to be mandatory in the interface file, and those records, if they're missing that, won't be output. So you can see there the example. You probably need a membership number for certain vendor systems. You've got a few different options of file types, which I'll show you. You can actually map the values within the report output to a different value. So you might have one vendor report, and it's got your company code on it, but when you send to one particular vendor a file, they want your company code to be translated somehow, or you might have 3 or 4 company codes that have different translations. And another vendor might have other codes that they want you to provide as well. So you can map it in the actual file itself, rather than having to map it in the report. And the last one there is just kind of nice. You can provide record counts and field totals in your headers and footers. So you could say, give sum of all the deductions for a vendor, and they can reconcile that to the amount of money that came into their bank account. or just tell them how many records they are so they can verify that they've got the full file. So some examples that we've seen customers using the interface functionality for. The one that I kind of mention a lot is the vendor option. You're providing some listing information to your vendors. You might be populating an external data warehouse. We've certainly seen customers use the functionality to populate SAP BW, but you may not be quite at that level. You may be even just using an Access database, for example, that you need to kind of bring some data into. We've also looked at creating a backup to be able to create a bank file using Easy Reporter. That's an option as well. So if for whatever reason you create a bank file earlier on in your payroll process, so if for some reason the system goes down and you aren't actually able to create that bank file, you have a backup plan and that file's already there available. Or just generally transferring data to other systems. So if you've got a system that needs to ingest some SAP data, generally they have a very rigid format for how that data should be provided. That might be a compensation system, might be a health and safety system. SAP might just be the HR and payroll for certain countries, but other countries that you're working with might pay in another payroll system, so you need to provide HR data to that system. So a lot of different kind of cases where you would want to use this functionality. The example that I'll show you is if we're kind of populating a health and safety system. So that brings me to the actual demo portion of this session. So what I'm going to do is jump over to SAP. I've already opened up Easy Reporter just to make this a little bit convenient for myself. And you'll see I'm not going to go through the whole process of building these reports from scratch, because I thought that was probably not a great use of our time. I'm just going to go on the assumption that you guys already know how to build these reports, or you have reports already built. You've got some specifications that you're working towards, those types of things. To give you a bit of an idea what I've done here, in this folder you'll see I've got a master report. That's going to be the report that provides the master data about the employee, so the employee's number and name, date of birth, hire date, so on and so on. It's also going to be the report that creates the interface file. Then I've got two other reports. I've got a first aid certificate report. That's going to tell me all of the employees who have a first aid certificate currently, and also a little bit of detail about those. So when does it expire and what's the code on it so we can verify it's correct. And we've also got an employee address record report. That one's going to go and extract the emergency contact information for the employees so we can provide that information to the external system as well. So I'm just going to work with the master report for now. So just jump in here. I'll quickly show you the configuration of the report. Like I said, it's a very straightforward report. You'll just see some basic fields, numbers, names, date of birth, hire date, so on and so on and so on. But this is going to be the report that I use to create the interface file itself. So to create an interface file, I'm going to jump over to tab 5. I'm going to output a file. This interface file option can be used across the board. So I'm going to, for the purposes of the demo, keep it simple and output a file to my desktop. But there's no reason you can't output an interface file to your SAP server where it might be picked up by another system, or an FTP server if it's a third-party system that you're sending it to, or even through to an email address. Some companies want to receive that information via email. The other important thing to note there is that if you are sending an interface file via FTP or via email, you may want to look into the encryption options available to you as well, because obviously that data is then going outside of your system, it's going to a third party. You probably want to keep that secure and encrypt it. So there's an encryption option there. I'm not going to go into the details about that, but feel free to reach out and ask questions about that at the end of the session, or just email me and I can provide some information on how that all works. All right, so I've picked interface file. Because I've chosen interface file, I have a settings button. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. This is where I go and set up all of the settings for my interface file. So like I said in the earlier slide, you have a number of different file formats that you can choose. It may be, this is usually dependent, hopefully you'll get a specification from someone asking for a specific type of file. But otherwise, feel free. You'll see I've got comma delimited, I've got tab delimited, I've got fixed length, every field is a particular size, or I can choose my own delimiter if I want to as well. So I'm going to do that just to show you. And you can see here, please enter a character. So I might delimit my file and use a pipe, because I know that none of my fields have a pipe in it. It's a nice safe character to use. If I was using something else, say for example I was using a full stop for whatever reason, I can actually use this option here to auto detect if it finds a delimiter in a field and wrap that field in quotes. That way it'll automatically put the quotes around it, so a system won't be confused and think it's found two fields when actually it's the single field. But I'm also going to put that back to pipe because that's just my preference. So that's the basic setup. Then I come down a little bit here and you can see this is where I actually set up the format of the file itself. So there's a couple things. You'll see I've got a main header and a main footer. I'm going to configure those for my file. So in the header row, this is how I was telling you the layout can be different for the header, the content, and the footer. So the layout for my header, I'm going to put H and S at the top of the file. I'm going to give them the run date of the file. You'll see some of these fields here are the ones that have come from my report, and these ones here, the RCs, those are all interface specific, so they're based on when you've run your report. You can see I've got a run date, a run time, record counts, and those types of things. So I'm going to put in the date and the time, and I'm going to put in the company code, but in this particular case, my company code in SAP is AU01, but the vendor or the health and safety system needs it to be in a slightly different format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a mapping, and you'll see this is very much the same as the mapping field set up in a report. All you've got to do is choose the field you want to map. So I'm going to choose the company code, and then you go and say, okay, so if my company code is AU1 in my report, then I need to output AUSX99, because that's the code that the health and safety system uses. For any other values, just put AUSX77. Same concept as the mapping field. So save that. Now I can see I have a mapping field set up here. I've got date and I've got time. The other thing you can do here is I know that this date here, our standard output for a date, so I'm just going to jump over to the output here. Our standard format is day, month, century, year, but the system that I'm sending to is slightly different. They want to see century, century, year, year, month, month, day, day, the reverse, or the military standard time, style, date, output. So the interface system allows you to convert that. You'll see there's also a time format if you need to change your time format. I'm going to leave that as it is, but I do have a time field. If I wanted to change that, I could. All right, that's my header. Done. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to set up the content. So here you'll see interface record types. This is the section where you say what data do you actually want to output in your interface. So sometimes this might be a single set of data. In that case, you've got a single section already there that you can configure. Sometimes it's going to be more. In my case, I'm outputting 3, so I can go ahead and add those sections. The first one is going to be my master data. The second one is going to be first aid. And the final one is going to be emergency address. Then within each of these, you'll see I have a button here to configure them. So the master file, the first thing I've got to check here, where's the data coming from? And in this case, I'm working on the master report, so it's coming from this existing report, and it's nice and easy. You'll also see I could configure a subheader if I needed to, so that'll delineate where the section starts. In this case, I don't need to. I'm just going to go straight to the body, because in my file, I'm going to go ahead and say I need some free text. This is the master record. And then I'm going to output the employee data. So I'm going to go and pick my fields. I'm going to output the employee number, employee name, date of birth, hire date, and position. A couple other things I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, actually, you know what, this position needs to be mandatory. If for whatever reason the person doesn't have a position assigned in SAP and it comes out as a blank, I know that the health and safety system is going to reject that because that's a mandatory field. So let's make sure only those are the position output. I'm also going to go ahead and change those date formats again because, like I said, we know that the system has a slightly different date requirement. So I can go in here, change that, go in here, change that. Done. That's my master data section. Easy. Don't need a footer on that one either. Okay, then I'm going to configure my first aid. So now when I go to this section, I'm going to say, actually, you know what? This is going to come from a different report this time. So I choose Other, Easy Reporter Report, and then I have this option here, Add a New Report. It's going to pop up a list of all the reports I have available. I'm going to drop down here, choose First Aid. What you'll notice as well is that there's also a button here to add parameters. So when you link in a report, it's just going to run using the same employees and the same date ranges as the master report. For this particular case, I'm actually going to say I want to change that slightly. Because this is the first aid certificate, I want to go and find any employees who've had a first aid certificate at any point in the last year, because I know the health and safety system is responsible for then flagging those employees who've expired and going chasing up and asking them to renew those certificates. So what I can do is I can actually offset the dates here. So I'm going to offset the begin date of this report, 0 days, but I'm going to go back 12 months. So this is going to go back a year from when I run the master report and show me any first aid certificates within that year. So you can have a little bit more control over each of those reports as well. Then I'm going to skip the header and the footer again. I'm just going to configure the body. So this one here, this is my FA certificate. All I'm going to put in here is the employee number, the end date, so that's the expiry date, and the assignment number. The assignment number is essentially the certificate number. That's absolutely a mandatory field. And that's also, they've told me that in their system that needs to be 15 characters. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 15 character length on that. So that field will always be 15 characters long, regardless of what's in SAP. And the other thing I can do, because I've chosen a fixed length, is I can choose to either right justify that, so all the information should be over on the right-hand side, or I could also add leading zeros. So sometimes you need to fill the front of the field with leading zeros because it has to be a certain size. So you've got that option there as well. You'll also notice here we've also got remove decimals. If you need to remove the decimals from a numeric field, you can do that. Or if you just want to remove the decimal field, the decimal symbol, sorry. Okay, here we go. That's my first aid certificate. And then lastly, I'm going to do my emergency address. So again, that's a separate report. This particular report is a nice easy one based on today's date, so I don't need to add any additional parameters. I'm just going to configure the body of the report. It's an emergency address. It's going to have the employee number. It's going to have the street, the city, the region, the postcode, and I'm going to convert the country key from, just for fun, from AU to AUS, because that's what we're looking for in our health and safety system. We'll save that. And the postal code is mandatory. Save that. Okay. And then the last thing I'm going to do is also I'm going to configure a footer. So I've got a header that tells them I've started my file, got a whole lot of different data that's coming out. Then I'm going to tell them, okay, look, this is the end of the file. So the first thing I'm going to do is say, okay, so let's give them some record counts so they can confirm they've got the right number of records. So in the master section, you'll see here, now I can choose a record count for each section. I can also include the header or footer. In those sections, I didn't actually put a header or footer, so these numbers will be the same. But I'm going to say, let's count the master records. Then I'm going to say, how many first aids did we send? And how many emergency address fields did we send? And lastly, what was the total number of records, including every header and footer record, so they can quickly get down to the bottom of the file and make sure they're at the bottom, they've got the right number of records, and then we're going to say end of file. Simple. Save that. And that is basically it. So let's save that and output the file and have a look. Go here, saved a variant conveniently for myself. So I'm going to run this report as at today. So the master data and the emergency address data, you'll recall, had no additional parameters, they just run as at today. But that first date report, that's going to run back in the past, that's going to run back to a year and make sure that it has output everyone who's had a first date certificate. All right, so we'll see successfully created a file, interface example.txt. Open that up. There you go, you can see here's my header row and it's converted that code. Here's my master records. Scroll down, scroll down, scroll down. Here's my first aid certificates. There's only a few of them, and you can see it's right justified. Here's my emergency address. Get all the way to the bottom. We'll say, okay, how many records did we have? 293 master, 3 first aid, 295 emergency addresses. Well, 2 lucky people have extra. And for a total of 593 records, end of file. And you'll notice there, I'm on line 593, so I can be confident that I've received every record. That's basically it as far as building an interface file. You'll notice there's one other thing in the screen that I didn't cover down at the bottom here. Just quickly mention this. If you have a system you're interfacing to and it has a limit on the number of records it can import, you can see here there's a maximum number of records per file. So you can actually limit those and it will automatically split your file into however many files it needs based on the number of records you've requested. Okay, so that's the basic interface output. The next part that I wanted to quickly cover, and this is quite important when you're interfacing data to other systems, is we have recently introduced Delta functionality. So what this is going to allow you to do is you run a report, then the next time you run the report you just say, actually compare the results to my previous run and only tell me those records that have changed. You can choose which of the fields trigger the change, and you can kind of give the different changes different names or codes as well. And you can obviously limit the file output based on those. So I'll quickly give you an example of that to give you a taste. There's further information about this functionality in the user manual and the release notes. This has been around since I think it was Q3, if I'm not mistaken. But I'll quickly give you an example. So here is a report that I've built. It's very basic. It's going to give me the remuneration history for a set of employees. I'll just show you an example of what it looks like without the delta. So if I wanted to interface my REM information to another system, this might be a report that I've built to do so. It might be a remuneration system, a compensation management system, sorry. So you can see here, all it's doing right now is outputting all the records that an employee has. Simple. So to give you an idea of how the Delta functionality works, let me go turn that on. So there's a couple of things you've got to do down in the advanced settings here. Okay, it's not there. Let me just exit out of the report for a moment here. I think somebody may have restricted my access. Okay, well, sorry, we're going to have to skip that bit there because that doesn't seem to be available to me right at this point in time. I'll come back to that one. So essentially, the way that this functionality works is, like I said, if you were to run that report, let me run the variant. There's a section where you turn on the Delta functionality. Every time you run the report, this result is stored in SAP in one of our tables in our namespace. Then when you next run it, you add another field. There's an indicator field that allows you to say if it's an insert, a change, or a delete of a record. Then the next time you run the report, you can say compare that run to the previous run and only show me the changes. And you'll see in the indicator field it will say there's been a new record inserted, or there's been a record modified, or the record's been deleted. That'll allow you to just interface those changes directly to the system instead of having to give a full batch file every time. but I'm not sure how I managed to lose that functionality, so I may have to just skip that demo, unfortunately. Apologies. So one last thing that I had on the agenda, you may have noticed when I was looking at the different file formats that are available to output, I'll jump back here for a moment, as well as the standard interface, which is that text interface option. There's a few different ways of doing it, but it's basically just a text file every time. You also have an XML interface file. That's a more technical style of output. There are certain systems that will need that as an input. It's a more structured, more technical setup. It requires a little bit more technical knowledge to kind of really get it together. If you want to have a look at that, if you know that you've got systems that require XML files, I definitely recommend having a look at Chapter 5 of the manual. It's pretty good coverage of that functionality. Or you can contact support and ask for help there, and either they'll forward this on to myself and I can help you, or ask questions at the end as well if you want to. But to give you an idea of how that works, you'll see here just quickly on the right hand side is the setup screen for the XML file. And as I said, it's a very structured format, so you can see I've got a folder and then a tag, and each of those tags then contains a field. And if I output that data, you'll see on the left hand side I then get a nice structured file output. It does allow a bit more flexibility, a bit more structure as well than the standard interface file, so it can be quite useful depending on the type of system that you're interfacing to. But yeah, that one's a bit more specific, where people are really asking for XML. The interface file option you can kind of use in a lot more cases, I think. You would never send, for example, an XML file to a vendor because they're not going to be able to read it. So that basically wraps up for me the actual presentation. Again, I'm going to have to apologize for not being able to show the Delta functionality because I'm not sure how that managed to be disabled in the system. It worked when I tried yesterday. So we may have to come back and revisit that. But I know that the Delta functionality is talked about in some of the other release videos as well, so you can certainly go back and review those if you need to. So with that, I will open it up for questions.
Thank you, Brendan. We will now proceed with the Q&A. However, we have several questions right now from our audience. Unfortunately, we have a very limited time, so we will probably pick up just a couple of questions, and the rest we will address separately on an email. So to start with, just a question regarding the Delta output. When or which release was the Delta functionality introduced?
I'd have to go back and double check to confirm, but I believe that it was Q3. It may have been Q2, but Q3, I believe. If you're on Q3 or later, then you should have that Delta functionality available.
Yes, I think I can confirm as well, Brendan, that we released Delta functionality around that release period as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another one here is that what chapter of the user guides cover Delta functionality?
Good question that I do not know the answer to off the top of my head. I may have to, I'll follow that one up in an email because I can't say right now. I'd have to go and have a look through the chapters to find it.
All right. I think it's maybe it's on the admin chapter of either chapter 5 of our release version of our user manual. Sure. But we will come back to you on that as well. Yeah. And maybe just the last one. How many different reports can we include in a single interface file?
Yeah, good question. So there is no hard limit that we're aware of. I've certainly seen customers build with probably, say, I think the biggest I've seen was around 8 different reports in a single file. If I just quickly jump over to the screen, as far as I'm aware, there's no limit, and I'll show you why I would say that. we choose interface file, you can see here that it's basically, you just keep adding more and more as you go down, so that's already up to 10. As far as I'm aware, there's no limit. So if you've hit a limit, then certainly let us know, but my understanding is that you can include as many as you like. Obviously, I wouldn't recommend going too overboard. Things will get a little bit hard to understand or hard to process when they're more complicated than that.
All right. I think that would sum up our question and answer for now. The rest of the questions we will just address separately via an email. I'm afraid we don't have enough time right now. Brendan, do you have other things that you want to add?
No, that's it for me. Thank you.
All right, great. So I think that concludes our webinar for today. For those of you, again, who have additional questions, or if you would like to arrange for a more in-depth or detailed session regarding our solution, just email us at info@spinifexit.com. And if you have additional questions regarding this webinar presentation, you may also ask Brendan, and you can email him directly. His email address is being displayed on the monitor. We would like to thank everyone for taking the time out of their busy schedule to attend this webinar. And thank you to Brendan as well for sharing this information to us. Watch out as well for our upcoming webinars and events by visiting our page at www.spinifexit.com. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.